So, hi, Sunil. So, just starting for the sake of the recording. Anyway, the previous conversation we had in the last conversation, we had talked of books. We had talked of what else? Economy. We
Yeah,
talked of
we had talked about our uh, some concepts of money,
money
right?
also,
So
yes. And that, in fact,
yes,
that was the primary concept, but
true.
we also had a
And
lot of, and that was pretty much a
diverged
big
into
understand. Yeah,
true.
that great. So, okay, so today you have decided to talk about the way we approach teaching our
Teaching.
classroom, what's our philosophy in the classroom, right? So, why don't you go first and then I'll follow you.
Okay. So I don't have a particular philosophy as far as teaching or learning in the classroom is concerned. For me, what the way I approach a classroom is that I take it on the go, right? Because a classroom cannot be a very fixed experience. While I do have a presentation that I use, and it is not that I use presentations which are just skeleton presentations. I put a lot of information on the presentations, and what I tend to do along with that is talk away from the presentation. The presentation is there for the students if they want to see or if they want to read about it. But then the discussion that happens is usually not limited to what's there in the presentation. And in fact, when I think of examples, right, the examples that I come up with, I never prepare my examples beforehand. And that's maybe because of having had that long corporate stint. I always come up with examples on the go. And maybe that is one reason that my students keep saying, uh, so by the end of the course, we usually get to know your family very well because there are a lot of examples that I quote of actions that my kids might be doing, actions happening at home. Right? So I try to make the examples relatable through bringing in real life examples, right? Not textbook type of examples. So that's one. Um, and what else? Yeah. So my idea is that when people study, right, it has to be a. I mean, any form of learning can only happen when there is a two-way process, right? I can stand and speak for hours, but nothing will get into a student's head unless they ask me a question, right? And which is why I keep probing them and saying, I mean, so do you want more clarification, right? And so I'll stop at that. I'll come back to two or three things that have popped into my mind while I was saying all this, right? So which is what
No,
happens to me in
continue,
the classroom
continue,
also.
continue, continue. Just
Okay,
say
I
that.
thought I okay,
Yeah.
chalo, theek hai. I'll continue on this. Now, there was a research which I read about somewhere, not a formal research. I don't think it was a formal research. I read it somewhere else, but um, they said that the way you ask a question to a student, right, that is also important. If you give out maybe a 10-minute talk and then you ask the students any questions, right? What is the default setting that the student has? No questions, right? So the conversation doesn't move further. But if you change it, right, and you ask them, do you want any clarifications, right? That sort of is one step better, right? Because now now they'll start thinking, okay, do I want a clarification? Any questions? Is no questions. Let's move on, right? But when you ask, do you want any clarifications? That makes them a little uncomfortable, shakes up the classroom a little, and then they might think of something much still better, right? And I don't know if the research that I read exactly said this, but what I feel is much better is um, asking them about what do you think about this, right? So instead of asking them if they want clarifications, I am now turning the tables on them and asking them, okay, so what do you think? Now, what usually happens is there is one or two, I mean, there are always one or two of those students in class who are enthu cutlets, right? So they will chime in and say, okay, I think so, I think this makes sense. right? And then, because when someone speaks, there will obviously be someone with a contradictory opinion, and then suddenly, because it's a peer speaking, it's not someone from the head of the class, right? Someone from in front of the class who's speaking, someone from the student chairs is speaking. That's when another student who has a different thought, who would not have answered anything to my first two questions, now with this, he or she starts saying something, and they bring out an opinion, and then when that sort of brings up discussion. So I, maybe by habit, I might end a small lecture with any questions, and then I check myself and say, no, I won't get answers with any questions. Let me change the question and ask them. It's that's one, and there are some more, which we'll come to later. Right, so also about videos and learning from videos. So we'll come to that a little later.
Yeah, sure, sure. So when you go to class, and as you said, your examples are pretty much organic. So what's your preparation like? Is it just the content that you have, and you depend? Okay, there should be some amount of fluidity, and you depend on your instincts when you go to the class. So I'm asking like what level of, up to what extent do you prepare yourself?
So it also depends whether I have a presentation which is ready. If a presentation is not ready, then I need the presentation. I need to create the presentation, because the presentation acts like the backbone on which I run the classroom, because there are boxes to be ticked, right? I have a course manual which I need to stick to. There are topics in the course manual which need to be covered. So that the presentation is key for that, right? That I am covering topics required in the course manual. But that's more or less where the presentation part or the content of the presentation ends. What I also do is uh, during, I mean, all through the year, I'm always on lookout for examples or for material, right? Could be newspaper articles, which I find relevant to my course. So what I do is I WhatsApp it to myself, or I email that content to myself, and then as and when relevant, I put in something on from those onto the slides. That way, one is that it remains current, right? Information is current, even if the textbook that I might be following could be a few years old. At least the examples, and there is some content which is coming in, which is current. And what I also tend to do is maybe after a class, usually not before a class, but after a class that I take on a topic, because now that remains top of mind. Whenever I see some news article or something, I send that onto the Teams chat so that the students can look at it. And it's usually not just a dormant send. People react once they've seen it, and I ask them during the next class if they, I mean, if they've read it, what did they understand and things. And if there is a certain perspective that I want them to take, I make them aware of that perspective also. So,
Nice, nice. Sounds sounds good.
and
So
how do you
okay,
prepare?
okay. So I'll ask the question later then. So for me, the way I look at a class is like a common, an open theater sort of thing, right? So the students are their audience in front of me. So yes, education is important, content is important, the learning is important, but I also feel, and that also like because I'm someone like that, so somehow I relate that if I cannot make the experience enjoyable for them, uh, they'll not be able to, they'll not start, they'll lose the connect with me. Okay. Since they're in that medium, that environment, and they cannot perhaps move out, so for that 1.5 hours, they might give their attention for some time, right? But in today's world, there's a lot of distraction, right? A lot of distractions around. So I lose their attention very soon, like that. I understand. So when I lose the attention, after that, whatever I say does not make sense, right? It's just a wastage of energy. So for me, the primary focus is how do I keep them engaged? That's the primary motive, right? And after that, everything falls in line. If I can sort that part of it, like how do I keep them engaged, and that engagement may not be only through content. It might be, for example, you talked of examples, similarly examples. As of now, I don't give much of personal examples. uh, Perhaps I'm not yet comfortable yet to go to that level at some point. Gradually I might, but I've not gone to that yet. Giving more personal anecdotes. What I do is give more examples from the business world related to the content, because my preparation comes from, so I do read a lot of what is happening around. Okay, why, what things are happening, not just the headlines but more details into it. So organically some of this strike for me. Okay, that's one. The other thing that I do is that I seek examples from the students, because the students are also pretty much well read at most times, right? They have their own examples, they have their own experiences, they have their own observations around the world. So I also depend on examples from them. Like for example, when I teach a topic or I give an example, I also solicit examples from them. And coming from that same thing, like you don't, as you rightly said, that rather than asking any questions, and most of the times if you ask this question, I mean, if people have not heard you, the automatic answer is no question, right? And the second thing is that even if you are the only one speaking, and if they're just listening to you, they're not applying their mind, again, the automatic answer is no question, because they have not actually applied their mind to what you're saying, right? They have to, I mean, for someone to have a question on your content, they actually have to question your content in their mind. Right? For example, if you have to have a question, whatever I'm saying, you have to evaluate whether I'm making sense or not. Right? And from there, the questions come in. Uh, so that's what I also avoid asking that question. I rather ask, do you have any other example to add? Okay, what's your experience like? That these are the kind of questions I ask. What I also do is that just to ensure that my students are attending or they're listening to what I'm saying, I give a lot of cold calls. Okay, for example, I teach something, rather than asking, do you have any question? I just randomly ask a student, one or two of them. I say, can you just explain what I've just explained to you? Okay, I'll help you in doing that. Don't worry. But I just want to see whether you understood. So the moment one or two of them start answering that, the rest of the students also get attentive, right? They can think, okay, this can come to us as well. That's one. Second part is like when one student explains, starts explaining, okay, other students also listen more carefully, right? Even the ones who might not have heard me speaking, they start uh, listening to that student, right? So in a way, I try to ensure that everyone is on the same page through those means, right? Engaging them. So my class is essential. So my research was on co-creation. So my classes are pretty much based on co-creation. I will be a terrible teacher if I don't have an audience in front of me. So that's what I have understood. Like, and if I have to carry it alone, then I'll have to make different preparation. Like the kind of preparation I go into the class is that I know that half of the class is going to be driven by students. Like that for me, I really depend on their participation. And if I find a cold audience, my class, the quality of the class hampers. And so my main objective is to warm up the audience. Like that's where my main things, as I told, that the experience part of it, right? Because content I know somewhere that will be taken care of. I mean, if they're engaged, see, I and my one, this is something I truly believe in. As a teacher, we cannot really explain or teach everything to the student. I mean, one fat thick book, there's so many things there, you just cannot teach that in a duration of 15, 20 classes. Never. So I feel my duty or my job as a teacher is not to teach things, but rather to ignite interest in the students about the subject. If I can do that, if I can make the subject interesting for them, if they feel, yes, this subject is worth pursuing, rest of the things they will do. I mean, there are so many materials, there are no dearth of resources, and students are well aware of this. They will go and search and they will study and they'll do a lot of things, right? But for my job is to ignite their interest, right? I have to like spark that thing, like, okay, that they should feel like going and doing. Because again, that same thing of distraction. After the class, they have hundreds of things to do, hundreds of things. Why should they even open up a book of the subject that I'm teaching, or search up something that I'm teaching, right? That if I can, as a teacher, if I can ensure that, I mean, and I feel this is the biggest challenge. This is the biggest challenge. In social media, we say that everyone is craving for attention. Every company, every brand, every creator is craving for attention. I think as teachers also, we are also craving for attention. I mean, this is the challenge, and we are competing with everyone, with social media companies, with brands, with creators. We are competing with their friends because that also itself, right? So how do we get that attention from them?
True,
And
true.
if we get the attention, we have to do justice to it, right? So that's
So
how I look at teaching, and that's how I approach.
I have a follow-up question on that, since it's all about the engagement of the students, right? What's your view on use of humor in the classroom, right? Because humor is a double-edged sword, right? One, humor gets people engaged. It sometimes wakes them up also, but at the same time, it runs the risk of trivializing the subject or trivializing the instructor also, right? It can happen both ways, right? So now, what is your view on that?
So first, I'll speak as a student of the sessions where I was part of the audience and the teacher or the speaker was extremely humorous. I enjoy such sessions. Like I truly love sessions. But obviously, I mean, humor again, as you rightly say, is a double-edged sword because if it's a varied audience from different backgrounds, a joke can land up any which way, like the way people take, right? So there, it's a responsibility of the speaker to really understand the audience and speak. People who can do that are awesome, just awesome. Because with humor, what happens is that I think it's the same thing that when your dopamines are released, when your dopamine is released, you're in much awakened state to receive any other information that is being given after that, right? And you automatically start generating a trust, like in a very subtle manner, you start generating a trust on the speaker, on the teacher, right? So with good, I strongly believe that humor is excellent, like if you can pull it off. As a teacher, humor is not my strength in the classroom, at least. Okay, I actually, so since I know this is not a strength of mine, and I don't think a classroom gives me. Yes, I can experiment with a lot of things, but humor is such a thing. I mean, it can fall like any which way. Right? Even if I'm not, for example, even if the humor is in the right spirit and students get it, the way I throw my punches also matters. Now, if it becomes a failed attempt, then I become that thing. Like students understand, okay, you're trying to make us laugh, but it could not. So that is it. So, and I know it's not my strength. So I really don't go around that path. Okay. So yeah. So my take is on this is excellent if you can pull it off. And I think, and I know for sure on that you do attempt humor and your classes are humorous. For me, that's not my strength, right? So I don't go there in that path. My strength lies more in engaging everyone. Like I ensure that everyone who is there in the class, at some point in the class, for example, if it's just a 1.5 hour to 2 hours class, at throughout the class, every student who is sitting in front of me will speak at least once, if not more, right? Either they will volunteer to speak or I'll ask them. Like no student who has come in the class will go sitting quiet and just leave the class. That is something that I truly ensure, right? So that's where I feel my strength is, and I pretty much stick to my strengths in this. But humor is not my cup of tea when it comes to classroom teaching. So now my question to you is, how do you use humor and any anecdotes that you have, humor, if you can, or
So
like how do you do it? Yeah.
there are times when I sort of I use humor to a fair amount in the class because uh, also because one I feel with light topics or introductory topics like an introduction to marketing and things, those are very relatable, very easy. Marketing topics tend to be a little easier for students to uh, imbibe because they are real world, right? To understand an HR topic, you need time in the corporate to understand, okay, what is a relieving letter or what are employee dynamics and stuff. But then as consumers in the real world, they are facing all the things that we discuss in marketing, right? Almost all the things. And therefore, since the content is very relatable, I feel that one can bring in humor. At the other end, when I teach a more technical or more slightly more engaged subject like something like marketing matrices, right? In that, I feel that most students have that fear that, oh, it's going to be very boring, it's going to be very tough. So there again, I feel the need to bring in humor. Now I haven't had classes which are in the middle, so I mean, which are decently tough, but at the same time relatable. There, I don't know how I'd use humor, but with me, what I feel is that one, I bring in humor with examples. There are sometimes when I force fit humor, right? When I going through my WhatsApp chats, I find something which is humorous yet has some link to the topic that I'm going to be covering in the next class, right? I forward that to myself. I add that as a slide in the presentation, right? Put it there, and then and I start with that with a very blank face. I start with that slide, and then I see people's reactions. Are they understanding it? Are they able to build a connect and things? So I tend to experiment with such things. Some other things that I do are um, attendance. Right, we've had attendance taking as one of the responsibilities put on us now. Um, and calling out for attendance is something that I feel makes me connect to the students, especially in online teaching, because otherwise you, if you're not able to probe and get them to speak, then you don't get to know them at all. So what I tend to do is during attendance also. That's one time. I mean, in fact, one of my students, maybe I might have mentioned it to you also. One of my class representatives, she said that, said, I didn't know that roll call could be fun too, right? So I therefore tried such things. But then the reason why I asked you this, so I mean, that way I'd be a huge proponent of humor in the classroom. But the reason why I asked you is sometimes I feel that, am I overdoing it? Right? Could I be taken a little less seriously because of all that humor? And it is a genuine question, and because maybe I'm aware of that, I try to limit it also, right? And I guess a little bit of all the gray hair helps, right? So students, they don't take you that lightly just because you look a little older.
I don't think with humor students will ever think of taking a teacher lightly. And the reason is, see, you use humor to pass on the content. It's about the experience that you're creating in the class, right? So they're not just seeing you cracking jokes, they're also seeing you teaching or explaining a concept or handling their questions, their doubts, right? And if you do that part convincingly, right? I mean, the main thing that for which we are there, if you do that part convincingly, pretty much everyone understand that humor is a tool for you to reach out to them, to connect to them, right? So if, for example, you were I mean, a teacher was just humorous, but when it comes to the teaching part of it, explaining concepts or delivering the content, if the teacher was not convincing there, that is the point where there is a risk that someone might take you lightly, thinking, okay, the teacher does not know much about it. I mean, that's something we all of us have seen. So I don't think humor, I mean, it's not about overdoing on doing it less. It's ultimately the experience that you create. If it's connecting, if it's resonating with students, I mean, if, for example, if even there are two students who come to the class just for the sake of the humor that you do,
Recreation.
right? I mean, they might have no interest in the subject, like to
True.
start with, to begin with, but just because of the way you teach, if they come to the class just for it, I mean, it's well done. I mean, because we, as I said, that for us to gain attention, we have to have the chance. Students have to give us a chance. So this is something I tell my students as well, that I might give you the best dish in the world, or it might be the worst dish in the world, right? But for that, you have to taste it to know whether it's the best or the worst. And so at least give me a chance that to give the dish in front of you, and you taste it, and then you judge whether you'll not come or you'll come. So when the course starts, give me at least 2 to 3 classes to see how it goes, and then you can decide whether you come or not, right? And then I should have the confidence in those 2 to 3 classes. I'll have the hook that after this, whoever is coming will come, right? I mean, majorly. So I think coming back to the same thing, that I think it's not about overdoing or less doing. I don't think even that's a question to ask. I think the better question to ask is that, is it working? Is it working for the students? Is it working what I intend to do? If it's working, okay, and if you understand the overall experience, I think it's fine. I mean, I mean, there's no metric or what do you call, quantitative metric to be
True.
judged, right? But one question I have about humor is that, so do you have few do's and don'ts? I mean, have you decided like these are the areas where I'll not step into, or I'll restrict my humor to only these areas? So do you have any sort of this things?
So I don't have a set benchmark, but then I try to avoid controversial topics, too controversial topics. But what I always tell my students, while I might not bring up that topic, what I always tell my students is that my classroom is a safe area, right? You can say whatever you want, right? And whatever you say, I am responsible for that, right? In my classroom, I am responsible for what you're saying, but you are free to say whatever you want. Right, so that I tell them. I say even if it is getting recorded, though nobody has the right to use the recording of my classroom for anything, any other purpose. But even if someone does use it, because it is my classroom and it is getting recorded on my name, I, I mean, you are indemnified, so to say, for whatever you say, and therefore you can speak out. And there have been some times when people have actually spoken and maybe crossed the line for some things, but and that's my duty to rein them back in and make them understand why some things could be controversial and things. The other thing that I do is, and which is what I was also going to take the discussion towards, is that there are some sort of socially sensitive areas, right? Um, and this sort of came into my classroom plan with all the attention that Me Too brought about, right? All the attention to privilege, right? After Me Too, what I realized is that there there are many students who are aware and who are sensitive about such things, but there are also a large number of students who are not aware and who are not sensitive to uh, all the all the things which can be associated with privilege, with movements like Me Too. I mean, the idea behind movements like Me Too. So what I tend to always do is, other than humor, I bring in, with every cohort that I teach, there are at least 5 to 10 minutes that I put in into a discussion with my students about privilege, about understanding, about being more tolerant, so to say, right? So I make it a point that at least that comes in, and I don't know, maybe, well, it's not just because I have two daughters at home, but I feel that somewhere um, students need to be spoken to as young adults, and also as uh, I mean, just to make them aware that yes, some actions that we tend to consider maybe normal or harmless might not be considered the same by other people, right? So I try to balance that serious discussion along with that humor aspect also, but I do make sure that that comes up. And there are times when I start a class with so there was once I think it was Muharram or Eid or something, the next day or the previous day or something like that. And I asked the students, which was primarily I mean, I don't think there was any Mohammedan student in the class. I don't remember. This was some time ago. Now, as them, why do you think, why is this festival celebrated? And a lot of people did not have clarity about why the festival was celebrated. And therefore, I went into a 5 minute discussion about the festival and then made them aware, because I said it's part of our culture. This is the world that we live in. And I mean, the number of, I mean, and it is something that we see all around us, right? It is not that it is something happening in one corner of the country. It's all around us. We have people from other religion, other cultures, and we should be aware, right? It's basic general knowledge. So I went into that discussion also. So there are things that I keep doing, which is extracurricular with my students.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. And this is so very important, actually. So, I mean, this is one more thing, right? When we can relate to what is happening around us, and if we can have a perspective around it, I think it's okay for us teachers as well, like to take out, say, 5 or 10 minutes from the class and talk about contemporary topics of things that are happening around us. If possible, connect to the subject that you're teaching, and sometimes it may not be possible. I think it's still okay not to connect and just give a perspective, because I guess as teachers we have had the luxury of living a few extra years more on this earth as compared to the students, right? I mean, may not be always, but if you're teaching a mature student, that's a different thing. But usually I'm saying at the undergrad, postgrad level at university system, we have slightly more experience, and if not more experience, I think the perspective might well be different. So I think it's always okay for us to share our perspective, because this is what builds their value system as well, right? And as teachers, I think this is also part of our responsibility. And I think it's a wonderful thing that you have done, right? It's so very important. One question that I had to ask you is, and maybe this is one last question we'll take up and we'll gradually wrap up. How do you approach teaching undergrads and postgrads? Like, do you have a different approach towards it? Because given their levels of maturity, and when you talk of postgrads, so since we both of us are business marketing professors, our postgrads usually come with few years of experience in the corporate world, right? So how do you deal with dealing, say, approaching an undergrad class and a postgrad class? So what's the thing? Yeah.
So, well, even the undergrad classes that we teach, they're also BBA students, right? Business students. Now, there is a difference between a BBA and an MBA program. Obviously, right? A BBA program is still a basic graduation degree, right? And um, getting the job that people relate with management and uh, I mean, an MBA or a BBA, one needs to realize that management jobs are not jobs that you get right after graduation, right? So BBA is something which is setting the base, it is creating the foundation, right? And I mean, I did not do a business graduation. I did a BSc, right? But then the BSc itself, the entire idea behind the graduation time, those 3 4 years that you spend graduating, is to make your mind mature enough to give you more experiences. And at the same time, while school was also doing this, the school was doing it more in a closed environment. Here you try to open them up, right? No uniform, that itself is, I mean, why should colleges not have uniforms? Because schools straitjacket thought by putting them in uniforms. Let them not wear a uniform, you have figuratively opened them up, given them independence, right? So now the 3 years of graduation tend to do that: create perspectives, create ideas, form the basis, right? I i tell almost everyone that don't expect to get a job right after a BBA, right? You can, you do, and there are placements happening for BBA students also. But then the idea is that the placement after that is also a stepping stone. Unless you want to get into a family business or something, the BBA course is not teaching you everything about business, and it is not meant to teach you everything about business, right? And at Jindal, that's a good thing that they do, which is that you get to learn foreign languages, you get to do cross disciplinary. And I'm not trying to sell the BBA program, but I mean, because of that openness of doing cross cultural subjects, cross disciplinary studies, the foundation that needs to be set gets um, gets set, right? Depending on how well they use the system. But then MBA is a professional degree, right? And MBA is a degree that you do because you either want a status change. You've had 5 years of work ex, 10 years of work ex. You're doing an MBA because now you want to break into the top management, right? Or you might be a starter, you do an MBA and get into maybe in marketing an FMCG company, get that ragda of sales or marketing if you're lucky at the entry level, and then you shoot up through the system, right? But an MBA still is a professionally oriented course, right? It needs to talk to them from a workplace perspective, right? Versus a BBA is a foundational uh, course. It is about creating perspectives or getting thought worked out, right? Creating pathways for thought. What you put into those pathways is something that happens during the MBA. My perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you've really put this really well, like the difference between the BBA and an MBA curriculum. So now, with this context, when you go to a postgraduate classroom, do your examples change? Do the reference points change? How do you deal? For example, you're teaching just one sub, say marketing management. Okay, and it's there. Marketing is there in the BBA level as well as an MBA level, right? Both for undergrad and postgrad. So how do you treat that subject? Do your examples change? The way you conduct a class, does it change?
Yes, with most of my MBA classes, the examples, I try to keep them less about myself. With my BBA students, it'll be more my personal examples or things happening around in the neighborhood and things. But with MBA, I try to keep it as more global examples, examples from newspaper articles, right? Or which I share with them or I draw their attention to. And I mean, so I tend to keep it um, more concrete, right? So things where there is a citation that goes with it and they're able to go read up more about it, right? And the idea is just to introduce the example to them and then get them excited to go read the rest of it. So that's more or less my approach from an examples perspective.
Yeah, for me, what I do is like in the BBA level, what I do again, I give examples, and pretty much examples are common. In a postgrad class, what I also do is that I ask them, because there are a lot of experienced people in the class. So I also ask them from your own experience, like in the company that you have been or you've seen, what kind of example that you can come up with, maybe in the content that you have worked, right? So what happens are two things. One, for the experienced people, they start reflecting on their own past experience. And second, for the freshers in the class at an MBA level, they get to hear more first-hand experiences. I think that is also valuable because that's where the learning happens, right? So that's where for the MBA, for the postgrad folks, that's what I try to do. And even when I'm teaching executive education, like with the people, it's a 10 plus years experience. That's what I do. Okay, any concept that I teach, one common question I'll have is that, can you relate to this in your own context? Okay, so if we just like very simple example, like if I'm talking about the vision and mission of a company, right? The question that I ask, what is the vision and mission of your company, and do you see this translating in the work or the functioning of the company that you see around, like the way your company is functioning? Do you think that there's a synergy between the stated vision and mission that they have and the way they're operating? Because you're employees and you know firsthand what they're doing, the approach of the management. Do you see this happening a lot? And then each of them will come up with their different own versions. But the idea is that it's not about which version is correct, right? And I don't judge them. I tell them, say, I'm not the right person to judge it. The reason I ask this question is that so that you start reflecting on your own experience, what you're doing right now. Are you actually connecting? Are you thinking on it? Because any subject you'll understand only when you start thinking on it. I mean, as I think in the beginning I told that igniting that interest, that interest would come only once we start meditating on a subject or any course on, I mean, thinking about it, thinking deeply, not just on a superficial level, thinking deeply on it. So this is something that I try in the post-grad executive level. When it comes to undergrad, we're just out from college. So first thing is that I think as teachers, we need to have a lot of empathy to start with for the undergrad special. I mean, at all levels, but especially the undergrad level. The reason I'm saying is that for many of us, since we have lived, I mean, worked different places, have studied, and have, I mean, we are well, the age gap that we have with the undergrads is slightly much higher. Sometimes we do not understand the reference points from which they have come from, right? And I think there we need to have the empathy that they are just out of school, okay? That understanding that they have freedom, they understand that they have freedom, but the understanding that they also have responsibility, added responsibility now of how to conduct themselves, of how to conduct around different people around them. Those understanding is not yet concrete in them, right? So I think there that with starting with that empathy, the way we treat undergrad is slightly different.
True.
Even the tone and the tonality when I give instructions to undergrads is much different than when I do that with postgrad. With undergrad, it's like more of like you have to do this. With postgrad, it's more like this is what you have. I mean, you do it for your own sake, and because they understand they're matured audience and they'll do it. But for undergrad, you need that at least the first 1 year immediately when they're out of school. I think that handholding or that sense of direction is important for them,
True.
right? So that's
In
how.
fact, I just wanted to add one thing about to what you said. The MBA class, the postgrad class, is very different from the undergrad class also because there is uniformity in an undergrad class, right? In the first year, everybody is 1 year out after their 12th, right? And that uniformity remains. But in post graduation, you've got freshers and you might have people with 5, 10 years of work ex, right? And therefore, because there is that huge amount of variation, the discussion in the classroom becomes very important, right? So that is another thing where, and the people with experience, they always have more stories to talk about, right? And
Yes.
when you pose a question to them, they'll say stuff which now the freshers will relate, and they'll also start discussing on those topics. So that was a very interesting point that you brought out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess we can wrap it up here for today. I think it was a great discussion. We had
Yes,
our
yes.
perspectives. We'll come back with another topic. We'll have to decide
True,
the
true.
topic is, and we'll
Yes.
just come back. Yeah, thank you so much
Okay.
for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Victor.
So, yeah.